In this video, we're going to talk about primary keys. In our last videos, we were talking about creating tables with columns, and we are primarily concerned with our domain integrity or column integrity. We were worried about data types and making sure we had the proper data type set. The primary key, just to review, is what helps us with entity integrity. Every table has to have a primary key, and the column or columns chosen to be the primary key should be unique and not null. And that ensures that each entity within our table, with each instance of each entity, will be unique because we have a primary key, and no two primary keys can ever be the same. They're unique, and we can't leave them empty. They cannot be null. So how do we create a primary key? Well, we use the create table statement. We can do it while we create the table. So let's do that first. Let's create a table. I'm going to create a table. I don't even need to put DBO. We'll call it example PK because it's going to have a primary key on it. So it's another example table, this one with the primary key. We do our column definitions. Person ID is an int. And then we're going to use the words primary key after the data type. And then we'll do last name. Boy, I'm not typing well tonight. Varchar 50. And first name. Char 50. And then our closing parentheses for our column definition. And that's it. Let's run it. Okay, so the only thing different about this than the last time was that we added the words primary key. Execute it. Command completed successfully. Let's go look at our tables. Here's our example PK table that we just created. Here's our columns, and if you look, person ID is there, and it has primary key on it. It has the PK set, and it automatically has the not null, but because it's the primary key, it has to be unique, has to be not null. Okay. Let's look at, come down here to keys. So here's the primary key that was actually created. And you can see it says PK underscore example P underscore, and it's got a big, that's actually hexadecimal numbers there. We'll be doing hexadecimal here soon. So the name of that primary key isn't very friendly. It's computer generated, and it's kind of hard to tell even what it's for. I mean, I can tell it's a primary key. It goes with an example, but it didn't even use the full name of the table. It cut off the K. And then it's got a lot of gobbledygook there. It really makes no sense to anybody. So we define the primary key at the column level. Okay. There is another way to do this. So I'm going to copy this. And we're going to do it, except we're going to create a second table. This one's going to be called example PK2. And instead of it putting the primary key definition on the column, I'm going to come down to the end after my last column. And notice I didn't put a comma there. And I am going to add the word constraint, because a key, a foreign key or a primary key, is a type of constraint. Constraint means rule. It's a rule on our database. And I am going to give it a nicer name, PK underscore person ID. And I'm going to say it's a primary key based on the column person ID. Okay, so let me go through that command again for you. I use the keyword constraint, and this time I get to name what my constraint is called. Okay, my constraint is going to be called PK underscore person ID. Okay, and it's a primary key constraint. Okay, so the word constraint, the name for the constraint, what type of constraint it is, and then right here, this is the column that I'm applying the constraint to. I'm making person ID the primary key for this table. So up here, I defined the primary key at the column level when I was defining the column. Down here, I am defining the primary key at the table level. Not when I define the columns, but I'm defining it for the table. And that allows me to specify a name. And a lot of times that's a lot better way to do things, because when your database grows, you really do want your names to mean something so that when you see it, you understand what it is. So let me execute this. It executed. Let's go refresh our table list. And here's PK2. And we have the same columns just like we had with PK up here. That didn't really change. Okay. They're still both marked as primary keys, but when I come down here and look at my key, isn't that a much friendlier name than this? Okay. So it's always a good idea. I prefer when I'm writing, if I'm writing code that's going to be used by people that are going to see it, I prefer to do it at the table level to get the nicer name. One other thing we want to see, what if we're using a composite key? Remember, a composite key is when you're using more than one column in combination. So what if I wanted my primary key to be a combination of the person ID and their last name? Okay. I want to use two columns. I cannot do it this way. I have to do it using this example. Let me do a third table. Okay. Third table, we'll call this example PK3 because we're creative that way. All right. And down here, if I want two columns to be part of it, I can just put comma and add the second column. And let me go ahead and run this. I don't like seeing red squiggles. Oh, my database already has a primary key called this. I got to give it a slightly different name. Okay, so my example PK3 has a key called PK underscore person ID2. And if I look at the columns, you can see that these two together are the primary key. Okay, so you have to do it at the table level. If you're using a composite key, you have to do it at the table level. And if you want to name it, you have to do that at the table level. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how to do this with the GUI. Instead of using, remember, as programmers, we're more than likely going to be interfacing with our database using code. Okay, and if you're a full-time database administrator, you might be using SQL Server Management Studio or some other tool. But a lot of times we're writing software that has to generate these tables and generate data for the tables. So we really do need to learn the code. I'm showing you the GUI tools because you need to know both ways, but don't use the GUI at the expense of not learning the actual commands. Okay, so let me just go up here. I'm going to pick example PK3 because we've already done it. I'm going to hit design. Here it is. You can see that these two are set as keys. Okay, if I don't want last name to be a key, I can right click and I can remove primary key. Notice that removed it from both of them though, because it was a composite key. If I want person ID to be the key, I can click on that row, right click, and just put set primary key. Do I want to save it? I'm going to cancel out. I'm just going to use the save up here. Let me go back over here and refresh. And you can see that it's just a person ID now. So it's really that easy to do the primary key without using code. Okay. Not hard at all. Okay. Most of the things we can do graphically, but it's important to know the SQL code. programmer.